Origin Unexplained.
Every year around this time, when the air turns cold and the skies hang gray above empty trees, people gather for food, family, and warmth. But sometimes what creeps in with the wind isn't something that you invited. This is Origin Unexplained, and I'm Sue, your host, and today we begin with a strange story that took place on Thanksgiving morning in the cold hills of Central New York. It was typical every year for the men of the family to get together and go hunting, a tradition that carried on even as the years passed. People aged, and some, like David, were no longer around. Tom lived down the road from his parents' house where the holiday dinner would be held, and while his wife Jean and his mother cooked, he headed up the big hill behind the house with his cousin Charles. The snow was fresh and still falling heavily, and it was going to be deep that day, and it was going to happen soon enough. The air was quiet, and the hunting hadn't been great as of late, but the day was familiar and comforting right up until they noticed a man in red and black, in a plaid jacket, far in the distance. He wore a cap and carried a gun, which was strange because the land was private, though people still sometimes wandered through. A shot rang out, sharp and sudden, and shortly afterward, Tom heard his name called, and it was quite clear. He looked around and he saw the man again, closer this time, and for a moment he thought it kind of resembled his brother David. But David had been gone for years. Charles wandered off, and Tom stood alone, listening, when he heard it again. It was a loud whisper. "Tom! Right there it is. Over here." He moved toward the sound and spotted a turkey and raised his rifle, and just as he was ready to aim, a bullet shot past his head and hit a tree behind him. Then he heard a voice. That was a close one. When he reached the spot where the turkey had been, he looked around, and it was gone without a trace. No tracks or nothing. No signs of it even being there. No tracks of it nor anyone else. So time went on, and snow was coming down heavier, so Tom regrouped with Charles after an hour or so, and they started back. As they walked, they noticed deep footprints ahead of them. Prints from the man in red, maybe? So they stepped in them to avoid the deeper snow. They actually saw the man at that moment far ahead, and they both wanted to find out who and why he was there. And he was out there near the clearing, and the footprints all of a sudden just turned sideways, as if the man had pivoted. So Tom stepped into the next print, which pointed forward again, and there ahead of him was a turkey 100 or so yards away. He shot it and then walked over to it, and there were the man's footprints leading out of the woods behind the turkey, and there they stopped, about 5 yards behind it. Tom crouched down so Charles could get a photo of him holding it. He then dragged it back and returned to the last footprints that were on the trail. The trail simply ended. No turn, no walk-off, just untouched snow. The man was gone, as if he had vanished mid-stride. Could it have been David? Did he save him from the bullet that nearly missed him, saving him? Did he finish the hunt by guiding him to a turkey? Only Charles and Tom could answer that question, but one thing still puzzles them and the family to this day. When the pictures came back, there were no prints in the snow leading out of the woods behind Tom nor the turkey. Story 2. It was Thanksgiving Day at Mildred and Howard's house, a home that had stood for more than 2 centuries. Its creaking floors and narrow hallway layered with a weight of memories. The kitchen was alive with the sounds of cooking and conversation as the women set the table and tended to the turkey and moved in rhythm with tradition. Mildred, standing at the stove, mentioned how strange it felt without her sister Coralie there. She had passed away at 80, and that was the year prior. Coralie had always been part of the day, but Mildred was the one who remembered her most clearly in the quiet mornings, when she would hear Coralie rise and shuffle out of the back bedroom with her walker and pass through the living room and head down the hallway to the kitchen. As the family settled around the table, enjoying the warmth of the food and shared stories, a faint sound broke through the chatter. It was a slow, familiar creaking, just like a walker being pushed along old hardwood. Mildred looked up instantly. To her, it was unmistakable. It was the same sound she used to hear every morning. No one else seemed to react at first, but then it happened again. Jay, one of the younger kids, offered to check and wandered into the living room, but came back a minute later shrugging. No one was there. The room was empty. That was when Marilyn, Mildred and Howard's daughter, gave a soft laugh and said, "Boy, if I didn't know any better, I'd say Aunt Corley showed up to have dinner." Everyone chuckled for a moment, but the room carried a quiet weight after that. Later, while clearing plates and tidying the living room, Mildred spotted something that made her freeze. Draped carefully over one arm of the rocking chair, which was Corley's usual seat on Sundays, was her church babushka, the one she always wore with her navy blue coat. It hadn't been there earlier in the day, and no one had touched that chair. Mildred walked over slowly, picked it up with both hands, and just stood there for a long moment. She folded it gently and placed it in the linen drawer, saying nothing. But every Thanksgiving after that, right around the time the plates were set and the table was full, she often thought back to the sound that she heard. The slow, steady creak of a walker on the floorboards. Could Corley have decided to join the family for one last Thanksgiving dinner? Story 3. There was a log cabin on Gulf Road that had been standing for more than 2 centuries, but it had not always been there. Floyd had purchased it from a historic site where it had originally been built long before the founding of the nearby towns. With patience and precision, he took it down board by board, numbering each log and stone from the fireplace exactly as it had been placed, then transported and rebuilt on Gulf Road with complete accuracy. He and his wife, May, moved into the cabin after their wedding, and it became their first family home together. The cabin sat back from the road among tall trees, with a fieldstone chimney and a small porch that always seemed to hold the scent of pine. The couple raised their children there until a harsh winter fire destroyed the structure completely. What remained was cleared away, leaving nothing but an empty lot. Across the road from it stood the old maple sugar shack, abandoned for decades, its roof caved in and the wood turned gray and soft from age. Years later, with May and Floyd settled permanently in a nearby farmhouse, the family gathered there for Thanksgiving dinner. Snow was falling steadily, and the roads were slick as Steve, their youngest son, drove in from out of town. He passed Gulf Road out of habit and slowed as he approached the old cabin site. That was when he saw it. The cabin stood fully intact and rebuilt with glowing lights from within. He was impressed that Sonny, now owner of the property, had rebuilt it in the same style. Smoke rose from the chimney and warm light poured from the windows. Inside, he saw the silhouettes of people gathered, moving calmly as though preparing maybe for a holiday meal. Too stunned to stop, he kept driving, wondering why nobody had ever told him. When he reached the farmhouse, he sat at the table for nearly half of the meal before he finally spoke. He looked at everyone and said, "I didn't know anyone rebuilt the cabin." The fork stopped in midair as he described exactly what he had seen. May stared at him in confusion and asked, "What cabin?" He repeated the story, insisting that the lights were on and people were inside. Pike, his brother, watched him the entire time, realizing Steve was absolutely certain about what he had seen. After dinner, when the dishes were done and the house was quiet, Steve told Pike he needed him to come for a ride. They drove back toward Gulf Road in the dark, both of them staring as the truck eased around the bend. The clearing sat silent under the snow. There was no cabin, no light, and no smoke. Nothing. Across the road stood the same old maple sugar shack, collapsed and rotting away as it had looked for decades. Steve stepped into the cold and stood there for a moment, staring at the empty lot. He did not say a word on the drive back. And for years afterward, each time he passed that stretch of Gulf Road in the winter, he slowed the car without meaning to, just to see if the cabin was there again or the smell of maple syrup was in the air. Next story. It was Thanksgiving Eve in the Adirondacks and Lake Placid, and the woods behind the old Ritter property, well, they were covered in a thick, undisturbed layer of snow. Jacob had driven up from Shroon Lake to visit his cousin Darren, who lived just past the town in a house tucked into the base of the wooded ridge. Dinner wasn't until 4, so Jacob decided to take a walk behind the property, something he'd done every year since he was a teenager. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his boots pressing into the snow. He made it about a quarter mile in when he saw a medium-sized moose moving as quick as it could through the trees. Behind it, it was what he thought was a bear at first, crossing the trail ahead. But it moved wrong. Too upright, too fast. He stood still, heart thudding. The creature was covered in black-brown fur, but its arms swung low at its sides, and it never broke stride. It crossed the trail and disappeared down into a shallow gully. But not before turning its head. Jacob swore it looked directly at him. Its eyes were small and dark, and its face looked more human than animal. He didn't move, not until the sun dropped low and the cold started to bite through his coat. At dinner, he told Darren what he had seen. Darren didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly and said, so you've seen him too? No one else in the family talked about it, but later that night, Jacob stepped out onto the back porch and the floodlight shined on the snow. Just then, he noticed the snow had been disrupted again. This time, just past the woodpile. 2 prints deep, wider than any boot, and already half filled with new snow. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and the float crew was working late inside one of the storage hangars just outside of Manhattan, New York, piecing together the final details for one of the newer additions to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. The float was meant to resemble an old Victorian street scene, complete with a working lamppost, brick facades, and mannequins dressed in early 1900s clothing. The crew joked that it felt like they were building a miniature ghost town. But by Wednesday morning, the atmosphere had shifted. Tools were missing, screws that had been tightened were found loose again, and one of the mannequins had somehow been moved several feet from where it was originally staged. No one had admitted to touching it. Carlos, one of the lighting techs, climbed inside the float to rewire the lamppost and said he had heard a humming from inside the structure. Something old. Like a lullaby or music from a gramophone, maybe? He thought someone was playing a prank, but when he stepped out, no one was near. Another worker later admitted that they had heard the same humming, except it seemed to be coming from the inside of the storefront set piece, when no one was there. That evening, Liza, the youngest member of the team, took a short video for the documentation. When she reviewed the footage, she noticed something strange in the reflection of the float's faux window. She thought that it could have been a shadow of a woman in dark clothing, but it was like a shadow. There had been no one on that side of the float at the time. She didn't show it to anyone. She just gazed at it in amazement. The float was completed on schedule and made it into the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Now, whether the ghost went with it, who knows? But that's what you get when you hold on to antique stuff and you use it. It was Thanksgiving morning, and Evelyn moved through the kitchen with quiet focus, just as she had every year since her children were young. As she was tearing the bread, diced the celery, and added her usual seasonings, she couldn't help but think of her mother, always insisting that stuffing wasn't complete without cranberries mixed in. Evelyn had never liked the taste, not even as a child, and each year she would leave them out just on purpose. Her mother would joke that it wasn't stuffing, just soggy toast and bread, but Evelyn stood by her version of it. She didn't even keep cranberries in the house, for that matter, except for the canned gelled cranberry sauce she served in slices next to the turkey. As she finished baking the stuffing and began spooning it into the serving bowl, something odd had happened. 2 small cranberries stuck together tumbled out of the mixture and plopped onto the counter with the stuffing stuck to them. She froze, staring at them. There was no explanation. She hadn't added cranberries. She hadn't even bought them. She checked the pan, then the bag of the bread cubes, and then the counter, and then wondered if they'd come from something else. But they hadn't. They were just there. 2 small, soggy red cranberries, exactly like the ones her mother used to stir in by hand. Evelyn didn't say anything to the family when they arrived. She simply wiped the counter, set the bowl on the table, and gave one glance toward the empty hallway, thinking, just for a moment, that maybe someone had come back to help her cook. Cook the right way. Thanksgiving isn't just about kitchen or food on the table. Sometimes it's the echo of boots in the snow before sunrise, the memory of someone long gone nudging a forgotten flavor into a recipe, or a shadow seen too clearly at the edge of the woods. As we celebrate the holiday, laughing, eating, and carrying on old traditions, there are moments that feel touched by something else, something older, quieter, and just beyond the veil. Whether it's a whisper from a loved one, a scent that shouldn't be there, or a figure watching from the tree line, Thanksgiving has a way of stirring more than just memories. Sometimes something stirs back.
Time for the bloopers.
The air was quiet and the hunting wasn't great as of late, but God, what the fuck am I reading? Go back to the snow. 3, 2, 1. Layered with every little thing possible of memories on the walls and the weight of memory, just altogether memory. Whoosh, go back, all the way back. Damn it all. I can't read right today. Ugh. 3, 2, 1. That was when Marilyn and Mildred, Howard's daughter, whoosh, go back to that was when. Apparently I'm a kindergartner today. Can't read. 3. Gave a soft laugh and said, laughed, huh? Laughed, not laugh. 3. That was when. 3, 2, 1. Snow was falling steadily, and I am having problems. Go back to years later. 3, 2, 1. As Steve, their youngest son, drove in from town. Yeah, he drove in from town. How about out of town? That would make a lot more sense. Back to snow was strange in the reflection of the floats. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. This has been another episode of Origin Unexplained. If you have a story you would like told or you'd like to be on a podcast, email us at originunexplained@gmail.com.